Hey, howdy. I'm Colson Whitehead, here to talk to you about my book, The Nickel Boys. So the novel is based on the story of the Florida School for Boys, which operated for over 100 years. The idea behind this reformatory school was an enlightened one. How can we rehabilitate young offenders instead of locking them up with adult criminals? By providing education, life skills, job training, alternating classroom days with work days. From the start, there were disturbing reports of abuse about violent beatings, sexual assault, solitary confinement. There was a concrete utility shed on campus called the White House, where boys were whipped with a leather strap called Black Beauty. The students nicknamed the White House the ice cream factory because you came out with bruises of every color. The boys continued to tell their stories of torture, various abuse, and even homicide for decades and decades until the state investigations closed the place down in 2011. I first heard of Dozier in 2014 when the national media picked up the story. They discovered an unmarked graveyard with bodies that testified to horrific violence, blunt trauma to skulls, shotgun pellets, and rib cages. Over the years, boys had disappeared. The families had been told that they'd run off when in fact they were in the ground. Like I said, it was the summer of 2014. Michael Brown, an unarmed teenager, had been shot to death in Ferguson, Missouri by a white policeman. Eric Garner was choked to death in Staten Island by a white policeman. With the rise of cell phone cameras, everyday acts of violence against Black people were being recorded. But the devices didn't capture a sudden spike in incidents. They merely recorded the standard level of brutality. We had the technology to see it now, the new things, the things that happen every day. The way a new telescope doesn't discover new galaxies, it only renders visible the ancient stars that have always been there. Despite the evidence, it seemed in these cases, it seemed with George Floyd, no one is ever held accountable. Dozier provided more proof of this terrible reality. The school had been in the business of mangling the lives of young boys for over 100 years, and the perpetrators went unpunished. Most of the Dozier survivors who came forward were white, but the majority of students were African American. And I wondered about the Black boys and what a novel inspired by this closed reform school might look like. So I had a place, I needed characters. Sometimes a fragment of my personality makes its way into my characters or the supporting characters, and sometimes not. Cora, the protagonist of the Underground Railroad, has the least amount of my personality in her, which is probably why it's my most popular book. I'm not complaining, I just couldn't help but notice. But to create the two heroes for the Nickel Boys, I borrowed from my own internal dilemma. In the Trump administration, do I have a reason to be hopeful that our country is on the right track when there's so much evidence to the contrary? I'd like to think that the world is getting better for my children, for the children they might have someday, the same way my parents and grandparents hoped that their offspring would grow up in a better world than the one they grew up in, with its constant racial injustice that confronted them every day. I would like to believe that, but it's very hard sometimes. So I picked two protagonists that spoke to different parts of my personality, the hopeful one, and then the pragmatic or cynical side. For Elwood, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. provides a model of engagement with the dark forces of the world. If you stand up, if you fight for justice, you can remake the social order. Turner, on the other hand, has survived by seeing the world as it actually is, not how we want it to be. The Nickel Academy becomes a stand-in for all the malevolent powers that grind us down. When Elwood and Turner meet inside the school, their debate about how to live and exist begins. And for me, that's the heart of the novel, the war between these two philosophies. So that's the book. I hope you pick it up. I hope you enjoy reading it as much as I enjoyed writing it. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.